If you have been trying to watch things like the Diddy documentary or the Epstein file coverage, and you find yourself getting completely overwhelmingly triggered, this episode is going to help you understand why that is happening and why it makes complete sense. Welcome back to the episode. What is happening in the news in the world right now is triggering on a baseline level for people who have not been through narcissistic abuse. But for those of us who have, we are experiencing a deeper, more personal level of being triggered by these news stories, these headlines, these things happening in the world. So if you are feeling anxiety or anger or panic or confusion or shutdown in your body after you are trying to watch these things, first of all, I want you to know that you're not crazy. And we're going to explain in this episode exactly what is happening. You are not overreacting. If you experience narcissistic abuse of any kind or coercive control, your nervous system is picking up on something that it has experienced, something that's familiar. What we're seeing play out on the macro level in the world right now are the same patterns of harm that you likely lived through, and that can feel really incredibly disorienting, especially if you are out of that situation now, to be feeling those feelings in your body again. So today I brought back one of the fan favorites of the podcast. Her name is hilary.buckwalterwilde. She is full of so much wisdom, and she is a survivor of narcissistic abuse herself. She is also a therapist, she's a visionary, she's a guide, she supports women on a really holistic level. And today we're talking about what these patterns of control are, why they feel so activating for survivors, how to really start making sense of your experience so that you aren't finding yourself gaslighting yourself, feeling crazy, feeling like you're being overdramatic in what you are experiencing. And we're going to talk about what actually helps. So you're going to get some literal, actual tools that you can use at the end of this episode to help regulate your system, to stay informed without being overwhelmed. So if you're feeling a little edgier lately, or if the world is feeling especially heavy and hopeless and you aren't sure how to piece your way through it, this episode is for you. You're so not alone in this. And be sure to stick around to the end of the episode as well, because we always pull an oracle card. And this card will just offer you a message that you can take and noodle on and see how it applies to you and your healing this week. Okay, let's welcome Hilary. Take a deep breath and let's begin. Hilary, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Bre. I'm so happy to be here as always.
Always love these conversations. When we first started talking about this episode and what we wanted to do, the Diddy documentary had recently come out, and we were like, we need to bring some awareness to why this is hitting survivors so hard. I went to try to watch the documentary, and I was like, we definitely need to talk about why this is so hard to watch. And since then, we've had a lot come out around the Epstein files. We've had this war in Iran. We've had so many different things happening at our society at large that all have a through line that we're going to talk about today. So to help us understand, what is this through line? What are we experiencing? Why are all of these things so hard to watch and be a part of and understand on a micro and a macro level?
So much has happened and continues to happen every day. And I know it's been hard for me as just being a human these past months. When the Diddy documentary came out, I mean, I loved the title, The Reckoning.
Yeah.
So apt. And it just brought up so much for me as a narcissistic abuse survivor, watching it, seeing things that I had experienced, and just watching the dynamics of how these powerful men are enabled, how they're rewarded for their behavior, and the fallout and for the victims and how they become like casualties in the whole story of someone who's expressing like malignant narcissist traits, which is kind of what I witnessed in watching the story about Diddy. And it was like so well done. But since then, I've been kind of playing around with this idea of like, what if we were able to name the pattern of harm in these forms of relational abuse rather than getting stuck on the diagnoses specifically? And so we've talked in past episodes about, narcissism, malignant narcissism, and these are real things. real disorders in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health. But there's something about getting into the architecture of it for me that feels helpful as a survivor. It feels helpful as a therapist. It feels helpful as a person in the world to begin to understand, like, as you said, like, what are the through lines of these patterns? And how can naming these forms of relational abuse actually help us learn more about what they are and how they operate, and see that they're not happening just at an individual level, but they're happening like on a national level. So it like scales up from personal relationship all the way up through systems and institutions into the government.
Yeah. Yes. It's wild to think that we can experience something so similar on a micro and a macro level. And I love how you're redirecting away from needing the diagnoses, because I think sometimes we can get stuck of like, well, I don't know if he's exactly a narcissist because he doesn't qualify in this one specific thing that I read about or listened to. And it doesn't actually matter their diagnosis. What matters is the consequence of their behavior. So you helping us understand more of these patterns of harm and using that terminology of like, whether or not they're diagnosed in any of the cluster B personality disorders is irrelevant, because it's the harm, it's the consequence of their actions that matter, not necessarily the driver of it, the driver being the diagnoses.
Exactly. Yes. And the diagnostic criteria we have also isn't great.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be very specific behaviors and traits for each of the cluster B expressions, which would be psychopathy, sociopathy, narcissism, and borderline. But what's important to me, like you said, is actually looking at the pattern of harm and the consequences of that harm. So something I've been thinking about, like as a survivor of these forms of relational abuse and as a human in the world and as a therapist, are how to create a structure around something so that we can better understand it and better understand ourselves and what we're living inside of. And I've been calling it cluster B patterns of harm, like all of these forms of relational abuse. And that's really a mouthful. And I'm trying to come up with like a better way to say that. But for now, cluster B patterns of harm means it's a form of relational abuse where coercive control is like the operating system. And then one of the hallmarks of this form of relational abuse is escalation instead of repair. And in the Diddy documentary, in ICE in Minneapolis, in the Epstein files, and the war in Iran, like we can see over and over and over again. And this was a part of my own relationship that was abusive, are these patterns of escalation. It's where things don't get better. Because this is something as survivors, you know, those of us who are empathetic and give people the benefit of the doubt and want to see the good in people, we're just waiting for it to get back to the good times, for there to be a turnaround. But there's often this pattern of escalation that really stands out as a part of this form of relational abuse, where things get worse. And just when you think they can't get worse, it gets even more worse and more worse and more worse. And like we're seeing that in a bunch of different areas right now with things that are happening like across the globe, the war in Iran, with ICE. And there's this pattern too in the Epstein files of all of these patterns of harm just escalating, escalating, escalating with no end.
Yeah. What is the purpose of that? What is the purpose of that being a part of the control?
Well, this again, we've talked about this before when we talked about malignant narcissism. This is the difficult piece for healthy-ish, well-adjusted people to digest and metabolize, is that there are folks who exist in the world, and more of them than we like to think, who have this internal operating system in which they don't have access to empathy and remorse. And so the escalation is a function of not being able to engage in repair, because there's no point to repair when you don't have that relational capacity of being able to empathize or sense into somebody else's experience. the only option for someone on the far end of the spectrum who's expressing, let's say, malignant narcissist patterns of harm is escalation. There is no repair. It's just up and up and up and up until explode.
Yeah. And that is after maybe several cycles of them saying the right thing to bring you back in, right? That's after they've seen that they've really lost control over you and how they can rope you back in with the I'm sorry's and I'm going to change and this is different. Is that correct?
Yes. Like that cycle of idealize, devalue, discard. That can happen once, it can happen multiple times in the relationship, because the operating system of someone with these patterns of harm is coercive control. So getting you to change your behavior to fit their agenda so that they can continue extracting from you whatever it is they need. Attention, money, resources, validation, sex, etc. And so when we start to push back on that, that's when the escalation happens instead of repair.
Absolutely. Yeah. Two things with the Diddy documentary and the Epstein files specifically is how sex and power and substances even play into the hook and play into the sucking of the victim into that dynamic, and how it makes it even harder and more scary sometimes to push back. Talk to us a little bit about how and why that is.
Absolutely. There's also a couple of similarities between the Diddy documentary and the Epstein files, in which it was really showcased how normalized it is for older men to groom younger women.
Yeah.
Which is also a piece of this that I think is important to name. And along with that, like, our beauty standards are actually exemplify women at their least powerful by making sure we're hairless, small, quiet, pliable, vulnerable, and easy to manipulate and control. So, like, all of those things together can be really dangerous with a predatory personality that's expressing these patterns of harm. So Epstein, Diddy, and then the use of substances. So any kind of mood altering substances, cannabis, alcohol, psychedelics, MDMA, those kinds of things, can be really, really damaging. And that was a part of my story too. So when I was watching the Diddy documentary and watching what they called freak-offs, where Diddy would take Cassie, who was 17 years younger than him, and engage her in these like weekend-long sex escapades that involved sometimes other people, lots of substances and lube. Like, it just kind of blew my mind to see the evidence in the documentary where there was just like all of these sex toys and bottles of lube, and it gave me flashbacks to my own experience. I didn't realize other people did this too. I didn't realize this was possibly part of the operating system, like this extracting through sex, that we've talked about it before, but I didn't think about it on such a big scale. And like photographs from Epstein's Island of, these weird rooms with like the dentist chair and all of these photographs of the young women. It's all like kind of the same pattern of harm. But adding in those mood altering substances is particularly dangerous. It was probably what made my own healing process so difficult, because what happens when, someone like me, empathetic, looking for a connection, I think I'm relating in a normal, like, healthy way with my partner, and these substances are introduced. For me, it amplifies the connection.
Yep.
For him, it amplified the extraction.
Yep.
So in those moments, he was able to like layer himself on top of me and my wounds and my stories in a very, very vulnerable, altered state, which made me feel even more enmeshed and embedded and connected to him, where he did not feel that part. He just got more control and more intensity. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it plays directly into and amplifies the dopamine reward system, right? Mind altering substances in themselves really amplify the amount of dopamine that we're feeling in our body, or the lack of dopamine in our body. It's directly affecting that, on top of these relationships that are actively playing with the dopamine reward system. And when there's connection and closeness and what you're feeling as a desire, right? We confuse that with love and safety. And we're feeling the dopamine and the oxytocin, and it's bonding us to this person, which is really hard to disentangle and make sense of when that's the person who's causing the harm, right? That's the trauma bond that's happening. And in sex specifically, even with substances and definitely paired, you're so vulnerable. Like you're at your most vulnerable, I would argue, especially as a woman, being naked, offering your body, opening your legs. Like you're literally inviting something to enter your body, and that is so vulnerable. And so again, it's like, I'm choosing to do this with this person because I love this person and I want to deepen this connection. Now he's inside me and I feel even more close to him, more connected to him. It's such a that's a powerful drug in and of itself. And then you add the drugs on top of it, and it can get really scary.
Really scary and so hard to disentangle from,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah.
And we are so vulnerable in those states. And so it's just heart-wrenching to me that predatory people can also use these substances to their advantage and make us like more pliant and easier to control, while also cementing like their hold on us. And that was really emblematic in the Diddy documentary, and also really emblematic in a lot of stories I've read about survivors of Epstein.
It's so hard. It was so hard for me. And I know we've touched on this in your experience too, to like reckon with how somebody can do that. How can somebody knowingly put someone else in harm's way for their own selfish need of the power and the control? Because as people who don't operate in relationships that way, it's so hard for us to understand how someone else is capable of those things. And there was so much grief in that for me when I came to the understanding of like, oh, this is actually who he is. He's not the person that he presented in the love bombing stage. That was an act. This is the reality. And that was so hard to accept. And then on a bigger level, to see how many people are that way. And like, these are diagnoses for a reason, because there are people who have this, I think we used in a different podcast episode, like this disability, like they are unable to feel empathy in the way that we can. And we're never going to understand exactly why they can be cruel and how they can use our bodies, our minds, our spirituality, our finances against us, whatever they're using. It's so hard to just like accept that that's a part of humanity.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That was part of the hardest part for me as well. But also on, this end of things, a couple of years out, it is easier to see and easier to accept and understand that there's something about the way our culture is that propagates these kinds of personalities who express these patterns of harm and exhibit coercive control and escalation. And that is helpful to me at this point, to really accept it.
Yeah.
Like, this is real. It's true. There are people out there who, for whatever reason, it's probably complicated, trauma, genetics, society, all sorts of different things together. They don't have the same operating system.
Yeah.
Like, knowing and understanding that can be protective.
Yes. Yeah. Educating yourself is always a form of protection. Absolutely. What else can the listener do who's in this place of maybe she's watched the documentary, maybe she can't follow the Epstein files anymore because it's too triggering to her. Maybe watching anything on the political platform is just like, what in the actual suck is happening? What can the listener do if they're in that place of feeling really helpless, hopeless about what's happening on the scale or happening in the world on a larger scale?
Things that are helpful for me are finding other people who live in the same reality and who can name these patterns of harm and offer validation, affirmation, and support. I think naming the patterns interpersonally and relationally and also kind of globally is also important to say, like, I'm not crazy. Like, there's something going on here. So we stop gaslighting ourselves about why what happened in my abusive relationship feels like what's happening with the war in Iran or the Diddy documentary or Epstein. There's so many examples. And self-care, like I feel like it's an overused cliche, but honestly, learning how to be safe in our own bodies and taking care of ourselves is so, so, so critical as things continue to crumble. And this, while difficult to like watch this collapse happening in real time of all of these systems, which kind of have coercive control and escalation as part of their fundamental way of operating, patriarchy, capitalism, misogyny, all of these things, white supremacy, they're all just kind of in their death throes, it feels like. To be able to name that, but also perhaps contribute something to what comes next is something that also gives me hope. Like planting seeds in these conversations, helping people like understand themselves, understand what they're going through, understand their experience. But we all have the capability of planting seeds. Another thing that's really helpful for me is spending time in nature and just grounding. It's like I can doom scroll on my phone, but then I can walk outside and the chickadees are at the bird feeder, and like that juxtaposition of like, yes, things are horrifyingly awful, but all is not lost. It's really helpful for me.
I think what you said about planting seeds is really important. I think sometimes we forget how impactful we can be with the closest people in our lives and then how that ripples. To think like, oh, I don't have to actually like insert myself in government to find justice, but I can start having these conversations. I can bring awareness to people who are then going to bring awareness to more people, and more people are going to act out or speak out when something is not feeling right. Right? It's like really refocusing that locus of control on what is in my power to change right now. And maybe for you, Hilary, I know you're pursuing your PhD in this to help change some DSM criteria. And like that's then like a bigger step in how we're making change in this system. But like you can start by just the conversations you're having with your current healthy partner or your parents or your friends, or like speaking out about these things is so important. Another thing that has helped me is I don't watch the news. I haven't watched the news in years. I get my information through like an email that has zero video, because video to me is it's so amplifying to just hear how people are talking about it. I absorb their fear. I absorb, what they're intentionally trying to do is create fear. And so trying to stay educated without being constantly triggered is something that I'm trying to find balance with for my own system. And there are times when I give myself permission to like not read the daily email that I get because I'm not in a space for it. It will be more activating, more triggering. And that's just, it's okay if I miss today's, right? It's like having a lot of self-compassion and a lot of awareness of where is your capacity today? And is this going to throw you off kilter for the people that you can actively show up for in your life and can make a difference with in your life?
It's really important. I do something similar to giving myself permission, kind of move away from all of that for the day.
Yeah.
Because having joy and curiosity and connection is also so critically important when we're facing what we're facing in the world with these patterns of harm.
Yeah.
You also brought up something about the planting seeds and justice, and maybe not everybody's vein is like political or even what I'm doing, like moving through this in an academic way. And a piece I want to highlight too with these patterns of harm is another reason why it's so important to be able to name them.
Yeah.
Is so that we can protect ourselves, but also know what works and what doesn't work. And I'm like watching this play out, with the Diddy documentary, watching it play out with Epstein files, the war in Iran, ICE in Minneapolis, all of these things is like healthy-ish, well-adjusted people have a tendency to try harder, to want to like push against these patterns of harm with more information or books or calls for therapy or like, well, why can't you just change? Or why don't you get it?
Yeah.
I've heard this a lot. Like, why don't they get it? Because they literally can't.
Yeah. And they're not trying.
Like when you understand, when you understand what you're working with someone who's expressing these patterns of harm or a system who's expressing these patterns of harm, empathy, goodwill, trying harder, these are things that will be exploited, not things that will actually work.
Yeah.
And so in order to come to some place together where we can find ways that do work, which are more like boundaries, loss of access, consequences through channels that currently exist, like laws and using legal channels, even though those don't always work.
Yeah.
There's something. But being able to name it also helps us learn what can we do that will be effective, because I think those are important seeds to plant together too.
Yeah. It's the same thing on the micro scale of like when you're trying to get your ex to understand how badly he hurt you. And it's just feeding his sense of accomplishment for how bad he hurt you instead of inviting remorse or inviting an accountability. So keeping that in mind, like for the women listening, I know they've done a lot of really intentional exploration around what works and what doesn't with a narcissistic partner or ex. So expanding that out, like you're saying, is really important to remember. It's the same thing with these people on bigger scales. Absolutely. Yeah,
exactly.
The other piece, it just escaped my brain. The other piece about speaking out and talking about it is that it combats the isolation and the secret keeping that we get put into when we're in those types of relationships. This doesn't quite make sense to me. This feels off, but I don't understand it myself. So I'm not going to tell anybody because I feel embarrassed about it or I feel ashamed about it. It's like our secrets keep us sick. And that's a saying from the addiction world. But it applies here too. The more that we keep inside, that we keep confusion sort of spinning in our own body, the less we're going to find clarity around, because it's hard to find that within a self that's not grounded or regulated. So using your close, safe people in your life to help reflect back your reality, to help you be able to make sense of what you're feeling because of the bigger reality around you. Like we need community. We need people. We need people who understand and who are safe people. Otherwise, we stay in that swirl downwards of, I'm crazy. I'm making this a bigger deal than it is. Right? We just get stuck in that shame.
So important. And we're being flooded now too by survivor stories, which I know can both be like activating and also affirming. And like finding our own way with those stories and honoring our capacity. But it can be such a beautiful place to rest, knowing that we're not alone, having our experiences normalized and validated. Really beginning to like zoom out and see how these patterns are a part of the fabric of our culture and of everything is so normalizing and potentially healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good topic. Hilary, thank you for bringing this to the podcast. As always, I like to finish with pulling a card for the listeners so that they have something to hold on to for today. If you will, let's close our eyes and we'll tune into the deck. I'm just going to start the shuffle here. So just take a breath and arrange your energy around what is the message that is needed for the woman listening. Whenever you feel like the shuffle's complete, let me know when to stop. Answer the call. So let me find that in the book and I'll read what it says. The universe is calling you to help others. Someone needs you to show up. It's time to step out of your own comfort zone and extend a hand or volunteer. Answer the call can appear when you have spent too much time in your own drama and you need a break. Answer the call brings with it the intended consequence of peace of mind and heart. Helping those who are in need doesn't mean you lose yourself. Being and doing for others is an act of love that the universe requires of us. The root of connection. No need to become overly responsible for someone else, though. This is simply an invitation to be kind, to help out, and share your gifts and talents with somebody who really needs you. Your presence, your wisdom, your humor, and your love.
Perfect.
Yes. Always being discerning with who we are giving our helping, beautiful, empathetic energy to. People who really deserve it and want it, who need it.
And who will hold it sacred.
Exactly. Yes. Hilary, where do you want to point people towards if they want to connect with you or learn more about the work that you're doing?
I'm on Instagram. I have my own page, hilary.buckwalterwilde. And I also am starting a nonprofit called Healing Hearts. We're also on Instagram, which is healinghearts.duluth. And that's where I'll be talking more about these patterns of harm and advocacy and education.
Amazing. Such beautiful work you're doing in the world. Thank you for everything that you are doing.
Thanks, Bre.
I'd like to do a quick little takeaway section at the end of these interview episodes because we just talk about so much good stuff. So I really want you to remember what we chatted about why these certain news stories and headlines and documentaries are really activating something that feels super familiar in your body because you experienced it on a micro level. You experience these same patterns of harm, these same patterns of control, and your body is simply recognizing something that feels familiar, which is why it feels way more activating than maybe to someone who hasn't experienced those types of patterns of harm. We also talked about the importance of not getting stuck on a diagnosis. So not getting stuck on needing to know if the person is narcissistic or a sociopath or has another personality disorder, but really just focusing on the consequence of the behavior, how it has affected you, what that has felt like to be in relation with somebody who has certain traits. And then finally, we ended with some really grounding ways that you can still stay connected in the news, but by also taking care of yourself. So start incorporating some of these tips that we shared because it will make the world of difference as you continue to try to show up in your day-to-day life while also being in existence in the bigger scale of things that are happening in the world. And if you are really just fucking struggling with all of this, and you're still trying to make sense of what happened to you in that relationship, maybe these things in the news are really stirring up some unhealed parts of you, I'm here. I'm here for you in that moment of feeling unsure and activated and alone. I have a free session that I offer as an intro session for people who are curious about my work, curious about how they can get unstuck from where they are. That link is in the show notes. So I encourage you and invite you to schedule that because you deserve support. And I would love to understand more deeply where you are and share with you how I can help you move through everything that you're experiencing and feeling so that you're finally feeling that freedom that you want. You're not staying stuck hostage in these feelings and these experiences. Again, that link for the free intro session is in the show notes. And until I see you in that intro session or in the next episode, please remember that you are not alone.